Here once again, and thanks for joining us for Wine with Wendy. I have some wonderful guests here. As I introduce you, please lift your glass and have a toast. First, we have Stephan Labossiere. I love to say your name. Dating and relationship coach from Atlanta, Georgia. We have Dr. Heidi Reeder, who is a communications professor at Boise State, and I would assume that's in Boise. She's also an author and a writer for Psychology Today. And we have Laura Hampikian, our producer, who keeps us in line, and she's going to read your questions as you text them in to us. So here's to let's starting another Wine with Dr. Wendy. Have a sip. Cheers. Ooh, that's a good Canadian wine. I'm here coming to you, by the way, from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, where I'm enjoying a great Canada Day with my family. But we're going to talk about something that hasn't happened around our house with all the family, surprisingly, which is conflict in relationships as it relates to the small stuff. Why is it that you fall madly in love with somebody, but once you're in a domestic bliss together, the dirty socks drive you crazy, the cap on the toothpaste, the way things are done? In fact, as I'm naming things, why don't we start with Stephan telling me what are the complaints you hear from couples that drive them crazy in relationships?
Definitely the leaving clothes laying around all over the house, not picking up after yourself, not being considerate of each other as far as maybe watching the kids, the time spent, handling duties, not sharing it evenly, things of that nature.
Those division of domestic responsibilities.
There you go. And one that comes up a lot also is the phone issue. Depending on how people are being very private or how they handle their phone calls, turning the phone over, the fact that there's a lock on the phone, these things happen in a lot of relationships and can create a lot of problems.
Because we all know these silly little cell phones mean that we can lead a double life somewhere. On the other hand, when I see couples who have a fused life where they're using one phone and one Facebook page, I go to some other place. But Heidi, Dr. Heidi, let us start with you. You're the communications professor. So where's the first step for couples to begin addressing some of the small stuff?
Well, I think the first thing is figuring out, is it small, right? Isn't that what we ask ourselves? It's like, okay, he's doing this little thing or she's doing this little thing. Is this a big deal or not? And I think that's the very first question you have to ask yourself. How important is this? And if it is a little thing that seems really important, then is it signifying a bigger thing, right? Are you thinking that, not emptying the dishwasher means a lack of respect in the relationship? We can make it into something bigger than it really is.
And do we always manufacture that? Do we always make it bigger? Or is this often a symbol for a bigger thing going on in the relationship?
I have a really good tip for that, and it's called the 3 times rule. And it goes like this. If you've argued about the same little thing 3 times and have had no movement on it, have gotten nowhere, then at that point it probably signifies something larger in the relationship, and you really do need to sit down and figure out what that is.
Couples often say that they have a great relationship because they never fight. And whenever I hear that, I always say, do they actually have any intimacy? Because conflict can actually be good in a relationship. There are all kinds of good reasons to have conflict. That is, first of all, you get to know your partner. The road to intimacy is one paved by ruptures followed by repair. And during those times of rupture, you get to see your partner in their regressed state. You may see the infantile them, the real child inside of them. You may feel you get to exhibit forgiveness. You get to say you're sorry. You get to grow closer in some ways. But on the way, the style of conflict has to be healthy in order for you to have a repair. So, Stephan, what examples could you give for what is healthy conflict and what is unhealthy conflict in a relationship?
Well, I think healthy conflict is disagreement. We're not going to always see things the same way and be on the same page, but if we respectfully discuss it and embrace how the other person feels, then we can have a healthy conflict there. I think also sometimes when people say they don't fight, what they mean is they may not be fighting with each other, but they're still experiencing conflict in life. And that is going to be a part of their growth process, and that's where the intimacy can occur, as you were explaining, because now they're going through that issue and they have to console each other, be there for each other. So that also increases the intimacy. So I think healthy conflict is just making sure it stays respectful. You're not going to always see things the same way. You may not like what the other person says, but as long as you don't get nasty and start calling them names and taking low blow
Name
shots.
calling's a big no-no. Yes, because then you're turning them into an object, not a human. But you know, you touched on something there. There are people who are conflict avoidant. In other words, they're so afraid to get into conflict because a fight means the relationship could be over. They so on some level may fear abandonment, or they may have a sort of hyper perception of conflict. Maybe they grew up with a lot of conflict in their house, so even the littlest bit of anger feels like this huge anger to them. So, Dr. Heidi, what would you say to somebody who is afraid to talk about the dirty clothes on the floor, or talk about the division of domestic chores that doesn't feel fair, if they're conflict avoidant?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, because, you know, when we first think about, we're going to have this talk about not letting the small stuff get to you. Well, there's some folks that don't let it get to them, and then don't let it get to them, and then don't let it get to them, and then completely lose it, right? And that's the problem with being conflict.
Okay, I admit I've done that before.
Yeah, okay, right. We've probably all done that, right? And the problem is that if we avoid conflict enough, then by the time we're too filled with emotion by that time. So sometimes it's helpful to nip it in the bud. And I would say you're safest if you just take ownership for it. You know, sometimes we don't want to bring something up because you don't want to hurt the other person or make them feel bad. But if you say, you know what, I've just noticed I have this funny thing where I don't like stuff not being ground up in the disposal. I don't like that it sits there because it starts to smell bad. I wonder if you'd be willing to help me do a better job with that. You know, when we take ownership for it, it seems a lot easier to bring these things up.
Dr.
So much sense. Yes, Laura.
Thank you. We do have a question coming in about cars. So keeping the car clean. I don't really care how clean my car is on the outside, but it really seems to bother my partner. He mentions this to me when I need to get my car washed, but isn't this his problem, not mine?
Whose car is it?
It's the woman's car, and her husband wants
to share a car. Well, you know what? Okay, so I always explore the whys. When somebody has a pet peeve, this is a great opportunity to explore what's really going on in their head. Were they raised perhaps by critical parents who didn't allow them to be disheveled outdoors and in public? Were they raised by parents that said our public perception of the family must be perfect, no wrinkled clothes, no dirty cars, no dirty laundry outside of the world? Is this what this person is saying? Or is the partner saying, I feel insecure, I'm afraid if a friend sees you in that dirty car, he's going to think that we don't have enough money to pay for car washes, and I will feel ashamed of that. So I don't know what the answer, or even if it's one of those two, there could be 40 more reasons. But I think understanding what it means to the person will help you get to know them better, and it will also stop you from drawing that line in the sand, the line being, well, it's my car, it's my problem, it's not yours. Because now you've gotten out of relationship and you've drawn a line between the two of you. Instead of exploring an opportunity for intimacy to discover why this particular pet peeve is bothering, what happened in his past, what's happening in the present, what does it mean to him for you to be driving a dirty car.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else
great.
add into that?
Yeah, and I would just say to that you know, you don't want to ask those questions in a way where it's like, well, what's wrong with you? What happened to you that you can't stand this car? Right? You don't want to approach it in that kind of way. But you know, you could put it on yourself again. You know, I have these little things too that kind of bother me, and sometimes I look back and I kind of get curious about where that comes from and sort of frame it in that way. I think the other crucial thing, though, is that sometimes we think their complaint about the car is a complaint about us. And so I would say, right, to this wife, that him having this thing about the outside of the car has absolutely nothing to do with you and your worth and how wonderful you are. It's really about the car in that case. And when we can kind of separate that out, then we can get a little bit more empathy because we're not taking it personally.
Stephan, what would you add?
Yeah, I was going to add that, you know, sometimes we should consider just striking a compromise because, you know, if he feels strongly about the car, and I know guys who really feel like every car needs to be washed when it's being driven. They're very just, I don't know, they're aggravated by the sight of a dirty car. So I think in a situation like that, she can say, okay, if you want the car washed, how about you take care of the washing the car, I'll pick up a chore somewhere else. So I'll do something for you, You do this for me. That way you're happy with the car being washed, and we'll take care of this one thing. Because I'm sure there's something that he doesn't do correctly, and she can do that for him, and now everyone's happy. So it's a way to kind of get on the same page, because she's probably never going to feel strongly about washing her car. No matter how he explains it, I mean, they can attempt to discuss it, but it may just boil down to exchanging favors, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Compromise is my favorite word in relationships, Stephan. I'm glad you began to use it. And I want to add one more last thing, which is, as you're exploring your partner's feelings about whatever this issue would be, and the one we're using as an example is a partner wanting her to wash her car and keep it clean all the time. So as you're exploring that this bothers the person, the best way to help them get in touch with their feelings is to validate the feeling. So the conversations should start with, instead of "this is my car and it's not, I don't think this is your jurisdiction," instead the conversation should be, "Wow, I see this really upsets you. This is something that's really a big deal to you. I wonder what's going on with that. I wonder why that is." So that it's easier for them to get in touch with the feelings they might not even be aware of if you first validate that feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. Never, I always tell clients, never dismiss how your partner feels. The minute you dismiss their feelings, you set up a battle. There's no way around it. So whether you agree with it or not, you still have to acknowledge this bothers them. So say, okay, I understand how this bothers you, or I understand that this bothers you, but help me understand why. So you're still acknowledging, but you're still saying, hey, I'm confused by this. I don't get it, but I'm not going to put down how you feel because of that.
Right.
I do have another question coming in about a small issue. So I'm in a second marriage, and I have a much bigger perspective now. Small things don't matter very much, but recently I've noticed my partner spending a lot of time on his cell phone when I'm around. How do I tell him this makes me feel unimportant?
Well, I know that Stephan mentioned the technology thing, and I think we're going to have to do a whole separate Google Hangout sometime just about technology and relationships. But I do want to talk about here how every couple needs to have some technology legislation in their household. They have to discuss what time the technology curfew happens, whether you have a technology ban during meal times, which I think is an excellent idea. And it really should begin, certainly if you're a family and there are children in the house, it's a great training ground for kids to understand that they better program or be programmed. In other words, they better get a handle on their tech addiction early and learn how to control it. So I think it's for couples to come to the table together and to discuss, how are we going to use technology in our family, in our relationship? What else can you add, Dr. Heidi?
Yeah, I agree with you that that's a whole conversation, because I think the tech thing isn't maybe a small issue. I think that you're right, that if there's some agreements around that, then that's going to be, it'll make it easier, on both people or on the kids too, like you mentioned.
Yeah, and it depends what the tech is being used for. Obviously, a porn addiction is a little different than him taking a couple business calls during dinner.
Right.
Stephan, what would you add to how do couples negotiate the technology piece in their relationships?
Well, I think, to be specific with what she asked, she never allow fear to stop you from expressing yourself. Most of the times, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. If you take a positive and loving approach to telling your partner how you feel, there's no reason why they should dismiss it. And if they do, there's a deeper issue in that relationship that has nothing to do with you expressing how you felt. So I think she has to not run away from it, because the longer that she does, the more she's going to get frustrated, and it's going to start to, pent up. And as you guys mentioned earlier, it's going to become an explosion later. So I think she just has to focus on doing it in a positive and loving manner, and just address the issue, because you got to talk about it.
Stephan, when you said that word positive, I remembered one very important thing that I want to share with everybody out there who's in a relationship. You got to water what you want to grow, not water the weeds. So if you're nagging, get off that phone or pick up your dirty shorts or unload the dishwasher once in a while, you're actually giving attention to the negative behavior. If instead you catch your partner being good a lot, and reward it with tender affection, with kisses, with words of praise, then you'll be amazed how you can shape human behavior that way. Even if it's just like, this was such a great dinner. I realized after this dinner that neither of us looked at our cell phones the entire dinner, and we got to really talk and connect, and hey, why don't you and I go to bed a little earlier tonight? Whatever you want, whatever the reward system is, right?
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah, I think a lot of times. Oh, go
Sorry.
ahead.
All right, thank you. So what if there's a partner that's not comfortable changing their behavior? Like, what if there's one partner keeps bringing up the small things and asking for change because it bothers them, and one partner just isn't quite comfortable continuing to change their behavior? How do you draw the line with that and not be a pushover in a relationship?
Go, Dr. Heidi.
Yeah,
before I
so
go at
Laura,
it.
are you saying if you're the person, okay, wait, which person am I? Are you saying if you're the person who wants change from the other person
And it's
or
not happening. Yeah.
and it's not happening? Or are you
No.
saying you're the receiver?
The receiver. So the receiver of the person asking for change, and you don't
Yeah.
want to change. You think
Yeah,
it's cross.
I see what you're saying too. Yeah, I mean the criteria that going back to that question, how important is it? I mean, there's things, in my marriage where, I don't quite understand why he wants it this way, but it is no big deal for me to do it. So why wouldn't I just do it? It's investing in that relationship. But let's say it's something like the car thing where this is going to cost me money, this is going to take a lot of time. There's really a good reason for me to not do it. Then I've got to express my side of it as well, right? And then go back to that compromise thing.
When does it
And
cross the line to controlling, Dr. Wendy? Does it ever cross that line?
Well, we have to remember why we signed up for this relationship and what a relationship is. A relationship is an exchange of care, and the care can come in many forms. It can be financial, it can be sexual, it can be physical, love, taking care of a sick person, it could be domestic, sharing a household, exchanging the care of that household, caring for children, etc. There's all kinds of things that care can be represented by. But as soon as you stop listening to your partner and their grievances, and you've really stopped caring for them, and you've stopped caring for the relationship. Now, if you're feeling that the partner who's complaining and nagging and wanting you to change all the time is really being controlling and has forgotten who you are, the person they fell in love with, and they're trying to change you into something else, then that's the conversation that needs to be had. Not the conversation about, no, I'm not going to pick up my shorts. But I'm telling you, if you draw a line in the sand, the two of you, or you avoid this situation, you are slowly punching your dance card, the dance card that will give you a first-class admission right to divorce court. So it's really important that you take the time to remember that you love this person and also remind yourself that they love you. And when you find yourself spiraling down into these kind of bickering things over the small things, that's a red flag telling you that you guys have to get back in relationship and both get back on the same team. And the team that you want to be on is the relationship team.
Yeah, and the quicker you can apologize and move into that, the better. Yeah.
Yeah. And Stephan, can you add anything to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, like Dr. Heidi mentioned, you have to ask yourself, how important is this? So, for example, I knew one couple who had an issue because one didn't want to put their Facebook status as in a relationship, while the other thought it was not, they thought it was important, it's no big deal. So the question is it really that important to not change your status if it's going to risk causing damage to your relationship? You have to ask yourself, what is more important in that situation? We have to remember that we should be focusing on progress, not pride. And that's what happens to a lot of people. They get so caught up in their pride of holding their position that's why they don't want to make that change. So if it's about pride, I think you got to reconsider and make the adjustment, because the relationship should be more important. If you can't deem that relationship more important than something as simple as a Facebook status or picking up clothes around the house, then you're probably not in the right relationship, and you need to be taking a deeper look at things.
That is so great. I wrote down
an
progress, not pride. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so true. Stephan, but that's a great example of a kind of behavior that has a greater meaning behind it. So you could construe, oh, well, this girlfriend is just having a pet peeve that her boyfriend won't change his relationship status. But really, what is a relationship status? It's a public acknowledgement of our commitment. So she's really saying, I don't feel you're committed to me if you're only telling me and nobody else in the world, and not changing your Facebook status is actually keeping your options open to other sexual and romantic opportunities. So what is, Stephan, do you explain that to couples? I mean, do guys or girls who won't change their status understand the meaning of that?
I do think that some of them don't, and I do break it down for them. I think the reality is, in many cases, unfortunately, there is that issue where they want to be made available, they want to keep their options open, and they don't want to express it to the world that they're in this relationship. I think for those who generally just don't get it, once you explain to them what it means to that individual to be claimed and valued in that relationship, and for you to tell the world, this is my mate, then they're willing to do it. But like I said, a lot of times it's just that there is something deeper going on that no one's going to like. And, you know, we have to be willing to talk about it if we're going to figure out which direction to move in at that point.
While we're talking about the small stuff, I want to talk about the big stuff for a moment. And that is to remind everybody what a healthy relationship is. When I look at a couple who are too independent, and by the way, one of the big fears, especially with people under 30 these days, is they're afraid to look needy. They don't want to be needy with somebody. There's somehow this message that they have to be two independent people who do not actually need each other, but they should be attracted to each other and get together for sex once in a while. Well, this is not a relationship. A relationship is two people who are vulnerable enough to showcase their needs to the other and help each other take care of their needs. It's called being interdependent. Now, what these people who are afraid of being needy are really afraid of is fusion. Fusion is a codependent relationship where nobody can remember whose problem is whose, and it's actually pretty rare. So it's about us learning to understand that if you are going to be in a relationship, you are going to have your needs, the other person's going to have needs, you're going to take turns leaning on each other's shoulders, and that means the big C word is going to happen a lot, which is compromise. You're going to have to choose your battles and decide which ones are going to be the ones that are worth creating a whole cause celeb over.
Dr. Wendy, I've got a specific question about, I guess, two different kinds of people that I think happens in almost every relationship type, and that's the clean person versus the messy person. I feel like a lot of times in relationships, the messy person is expected to raise their standards to the clean person's. Does the clean person have to compromise on their standards as well?
You know, I'm old enough to be able to call this the Oscar and Felix relationship. Nobody here knows what that is, do you? All right, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Heidi. There was a show once called The Odd Couple about two male roommates, and one was fastidious and clean, and the other one was very sloppy and messy and very guy. And it was a very funny sitcom. So this happens all the time. I'm always amazed that couples can get all the way to the altar and not know this about each other, first of all. Are they rushing into a relationship and not spending time with each other, or are they keeping this fake facade on and not actually being real until? I will tell you one thing. Being somebody who has a kind of neurochemistry where if my environment is too messy, and I'm saying clearly too messy, I'm not saying messy, too messy, I literally can't be organized inside my head. If my external environment is really crazy, then I feel crazy inside. I feel chaotic, I feel whatever. So I like things, as I tell my children, everything has a home. It must be put in its home. It must be put in its parking space, every item in the house, but not in a fastidious, crazy way. But when it gets a little too much, then I feel myself going crazy. So I think it's important that the messy person understand that that's really what's going on with the clean person. They're not mad at you. It's that they can't get their thoughts straight because of the environment. So how can that person learn to live with people who are messy? Well, my experience has been with roommates and husbands and live-in loves in my life and my teenager, is that we have areas where I say, this is an area that's a public area, it must be clean. So that if you've got a cave, a man cave, you've got a bedroom, you've got a workshop, you've got an office, that is your space. I will keep the door closed. I will never complain unless I start seeing rodents and vermin and flies coming out of there. But that's, for me, one solution that I have, is that I know I can tolerate going by a closed door and know that like there's chaos behind that door, and I don't care because we've set up the ground rules. But the public areas I get a little nuts about. What would you add to that, Dr. Heidi?
Well, two things, and one of these I thought of earlier, which is, sometimes something is more important to one person than the other. So in addition to how important is it to me, how important is it to them? And if having everything in the dishwasher is like, I'd rather not have to do it, but for them it's really important, that's the time to lean towards them. The other thing is that I've been both of those people. Like, I've been the cleaner person and the messier person. Like, I don't know if anybody else has been on both sides of that. But from this position, I think I can say, at least for myself, it is actually easier being the messy person. It is stressful, sure. Right? And I never knew this, but it is stressful, right, Dr. Wendy? It is stressful to be the more anal person, so to speak. And so I think if the messier person can realize, like, you got it pretty good. I mean, you got someone who's going to clean a lot, and your place is going to look great, and all you have to do is just know what's most important to them. I don't think it's, I mean, I think we may be making it a bigger deal than it maybe needs to be.
Yeah, those lucky, messy people who actually are in relationships with neat, tidy people, because you know that the division of cleaning, at least in the household, is not evenly balanced.
Right.
Stephan, can you add to that one?
I mean, I think this is another example of where a trade-off needs to occur. I know I'm very much like you. If it's messy around me, I can't take it. It drives me insane. And I've learned in relationships and living with people in general, at some point, you can't stress yourself over trying to chase them to clean up all the time. So you know what? I'll say, okay, I'll handle more cleaning up. You take care of this. And that's it. It's just a trade-off. And as long as we have a trade-off, we're more at peace because we're not arguing about, well, you didn't do this because I've already taken it on myself. As long as you're doing your part, we're good. You make sure you give them a part that they enjoy or it's easier for them to do, and everybody's happy.
Could I add one more thing in there, which is just that you got to be specific too, because if you say to your partner, this place just needs to be cleaner, like the messier person does not know what that means, right? They need to be told, like, what that means, right, is that the coffee cup is rinsed out, like very specific. If you just say, this looks like a bomb went off in here, fix it, like they don't know. So you really be specific and kind, but specific.
It's so funny you say that because I have a great example. I'm at a family reunion right now, and at my brother's house there are 29 people sleeping on the property in tents and in every guest room and mattresses in the downstairs basement, and I took it upon myself to clean the bathrooms, and it was pretty crazy. So I put a sign on the bathroom that said, reminder, this is a shared bathroom, and then I did very specific, hang your towel after showering, wipe down the sink after you spit toothpaste in it, and for boys, make sure you aim.
Everyone will be happier.
Yeah, it's better than leaving a sign that said keep this bathroom clean, because that means nothing to the messy.
No.
We do have another question. How can I ask my husband to just calm down? I am worried about his health, and he needs to just let go of getting everything done every day. He knows that his health is bad too, so my question is, how do I remind him that not everything can be done in a day?
I'm going to let Dr. Heidi start, but this sounds like a much bigger issue having to do with stress.
It does. I mean, that doesn't sound like a small thing at all. Of course, we know the worst thing you can do is just say, well, just calm down, right? Because the minute you say to someone, just calm down, stop freaking out, of course, that will make them freak out more. So, I think listening is a great strategy, but it sounds like really coming up with some specific strategies, and this is getting a little out of my expertise, but around exercise, around, health practices, could really be in order there.
Stephan, what would you say to a husband that's always stressing, that's always upset, that nothing is right, he's never getting his to-do list gone? What would you say?
I think, like you kind of alluded to, there's something deeper going on, and she just needs to really approach this in a very loving manner and try to understand why he feels the need to attack everything. Why is he stressing out? Try to get him to open up. The reality is a lot of men struggle with opening up at times, and she may need to take a very delicate approach to just communicating with him. And, also offering help. Hey, you know what? If you need help with something, let me assist you. Let me help relieve some of the burden. Or also assisting him with creating a schedule. A lot of times, some of us get so caught up in trying to do so much because we have no structure in our lives. So if she sits down with him and says, okay, if you want to get these things done, let's agree between these times you work and between these times you rest. Because it's important that if you don't rest, you're going to burn out and have a bigger problem later.
And I want to add to that I think validating the feeling without taking the feeling into yourself and escalating it is really important. So if he's huffing and puffing and storming around, your answer is going to be, wow, I can see you're so upset about that. I want to find a way to help, but I also want to find time for us to relax and grow close. And if we're busy doing this huge to-do list, we're not going to have the most important thing for our family and our relationship, which is the downtime and the loving time, etc. How can we find a way to get that back with us? You know, you may have to, if you can convince him to go to couples therapy. This is really important. And I want to remind everybody that we come into this world with a very special cocktail, each of us, of neurochemistry. And some people have really wide mood swings. They huff and puff and jump around. They are never going to be a very sort of narrow range of mood. That's just how they are. And they tend to be attracted often to people who are very straight and narrow, who look at them like, why are they going off? But that's just a different way of thinking and being. But if there are clear health issues relating to that anxiety, depression, anger, whatever it may be, the high level of stress, then it's something you've got to target as a couple. Laura, are we at the end?
We're right at the end, yeah.
How did this happen? I want to have a toast. Thank you so much to my guest, Dr. Heidi Reeder, who is a communication specialist at Boise State. Stephan, make sure I say your name right, the one that I love to say so much. It is Labossiere.
Yes.
I love it. Stephan Labossiere, who's a dating and relationship coach in Atlanta. Laura Hampikian, thank you so much for doing my Google Hangouts from Boise, Idaho. I'll be back in Los Angeles next week, and make sure you tune in. Thanks for joining us.